We do need to cut the deficit, and we need to get our fiscal house in order, but not on the backs of the poor and the hungry. They didn't get us into this current mess, and hurting them is not the way out of it. You can appeal to the fact that there's over 2,500 verses in the scriptures that deal with the issue of hunger, orphans, widows, the sick, the alien. I mean, you can't pick up a chapter in the Bible without coming across some issue dealing with the issue of the poor and the hungry. And God is very clear on this. He doesn't say, well, I think maybe you should think about helping the poor. He's very clear about you need to be involved. We've talked and talked and talked, and we've lobbied, and we've reasoned, we've sent letters, we've admonished. That's why we're having a fast. It's time to call in God. It's time to unleash God. You know, the discipline of fasting and prayer, when you put it together, is so powerful. And it's like I said earlier, when you put them both together, it seems like God leans a little bit closer to you. And you're saying to him, I'm not going to let go until you listen to me. Now, we've done just about everything, and they're not listening. It's time to set God on them. And that's the reason for the fast.
The first bill that the House of Representatives passed this year, H.R. 1, is really rough on hungry and poor people. It would throw 200,000 children off Head Start. This doesn't make any sense. For the long haul, for us to deprive low-income kids of a chance to go to preschool is not the way to reduce our deficit. It's particularly rough on hungry and poor people around the world. It would cut food aid in half this year, so a sudden cut in food aid that would throw 18 million of the hungriest people in the world off a stream of food on which they rely. Many of these are people who live in refugee camps. It would also cut a really great program to help poor farmers around the world in poor countries increase their production. It would take 4 million people off malaria medicines. It really is rough. And H.R. 1 is just the beginning, because that's just the start of the budget negotiations. And we know that much deeper budget cuts are threatened against poor and hungry people. We need to reduce the deficit, but all of the programs that help hungry and poor people amount to less than 20% of the federal budget. So it is not necessary to cut those programs to reduce the deficit, and it is not right. We should look at the other 80% of federal spending, and there is not any biblical injunction against taxing rich people. There is a lot that the Bible says about being right, doing right by hungry and poor people.
Ultimately, this is a fast before God, to whom we turn when we don't know what else to do. We turn in prayer and hope to change hearts, starting with our hearts, the hearts of our lawmakers, the hearts of the nation. We will pray and fast, each of us in our own way, for mercy, compassion, wisdom, strength, and courage as we make the critical budget choices about who and what are most important. A line has been crossed in this debate. Extreme budget cuts are now being proposed, and this fast is what I call a spiritual escalation. A spiritual escalation to bring those critical moral choices to the attention of the nation, and seek God's help in doing so.
Churches and charities can do a lot. In fact, a lot of us have given sacrificially in this economic crisis to help our local food pantry or our local food bank. But churches and charities can't do it all. You know, in our country, we've built up a huge and really valuable system of food charities and food banks. But all of the food charity in the country is equivalent to about 6% of the food that poor people in our country get from the federal food programs, food stamps, WIC, school lunches, and school breakfasts. So, just a little bit of change in what the government does could either double what we're doing through food banks or cancel it out. I was scandalized that the House of Representatives in H.R. 1 cut food aid and Head Start, but did not cut one nickel from our military budget. I mean, even if you want to do all the things that we're now doing with the military budget, we can't find one nickel. I mean, it's a huge budget. Even for our own security, Secretary Bob Gates, the Secretary of Defense, has made it really clear that it's important to have strong programs of assistance to help poor people in poor countries move out of poverty. You can create stability that way, and investing in development and protecting people from the sudden setbacks that are caused by high food prices is much, much less expensive than waiting and then maybe having to send in troops someplace. There's an ancient tradition at times like this of fasting and praying and asking God to guide my life, but also to guide my nation's life. So now it's not just fasting and praying, we also need to take action. And so Bread for the World and the other groups that are part of this are asking people of faith and conscience to write to their senators, and specifically to write to their senators within the next week. This debate is unfolding right now, and ask their senators and representatives to help form a circle of protection around the programs that help poor and hungry people in our country and around the world. They're not that big. So we can reduce our deficit, we should reduce the deficit, but we can do that without hurting people who are already hungry and poor. For me, it's kind of a wake-up call for myself to say this is serious business. And also when you fast, you do tend to kind of get weaker, so you rely more on God. And this is a time when the two political parties are locked in conflict. We need something else. We need God. We really need God to intervene in our nation's life. And I think it's not just that God's going to influence the senators or the representatives. It's also that if we really ask for God's guidance for our nation, God will get us off the couch to use this budget decision as a time to make our nation something better than we've been. When we come out of the economic crisis, we're not going to be what we used to be. And we can make ourselves a country that's more fair and a world in which there are not so many hungry and poor people. And those are the decisions we ought to be making in this time of budget decision.
A fast is a way of calling attention to something that's in dire straits. And, you look at the situation today, it's probably, as far as hungry and poor people, it's worse today than it was in 1960. You've got 25,000 people that will die today from hunger and hunger-related diseases. You've got 50 million people in our own country that are hungry. It's not like the hunger in Sudan, but it's hunger nevertheless, where 2 or 3 days out of every month they go to bed without food. And then you got 2.5 billion people in the world today that are making less than $2 a day. So it's dire. And at the same time, the prices of food and energy are going up. And then at the same time, when they're cutting the budget, and there needs to be fiscal responsibility, but you can't do it on the backs of the poorest of the poor. That's wrong. I think a country is evaluated on how they treat the least of these, how they treat the poor. And when you have a country like ours that's been blessed over and over and over again, I think we'll be evaluated and how we handle this.